I tell everybody I'm from up north because I grew up in Palatka, and I was raised by a guy who once transplanted a full-grown oak they were putting in a gas line, and they wouldn't bend it around the oak tree. Anyway, that just sort of set the tone for the whole thing. My father's grandmother was from Georgia. I'm not sure when they came down here, sometime in the 1800s. My mother's side, her father's family had people that have been in the San Mateo in Putnam County area since before the Civil War. We go back to in Florida since the 1800s. And I went to the University of Florida, undergrad and law school, and finally got to do what I had decided to do when I was about 5 years old, and that was be somebody representing people charged with crimes that couldn't afford a lawyer. I didn't know what that was, but then they decided Gideon versus Wainwright, paying job. Anyway, that was going to be my job, and I didn't do anything environmental for a long time. Well, my dad was a lawyer, except he only worked as a court reporter. I don't know where that came from, but I wanted to represent people charged with a crime. And literally how I got into law school was my name, Brynn Newton. All my correspondence came to Mr. Brian Newton. I mean, that's in every field. The college would always send my correspondence to Mr. Brynn Newton, Brian, and they didn't have a quota system. They will deny that, but every fall there were 300 law students admitted with 30 women. Every spring, 100 with 10 women. 30, 300, 30, 100, 11, 300, 30. There happened to be 11 women in my class, but they didn't know I was a woman. You know, and now it's almost 50-50, I hear, but 10% of the class, except my class, 11% was female. What did I do? I went to school mainly. I remember my mother saying, "You're going to get an education in spite of the Putnam County school education system." Let's see. Oh, I did wind up with some fabulous teachers. And I found out just a couple of years ago that my favorite teacher, my husband met her daughter and said, "Mrs. Thomas talked about me." And I thought that was amazing, since she wrote in my high school annual, "You are incorrigible."
Would you describe your personality as a girl?
I was very shy until the Beatles. The Beatles came along and saved a lot of us after Kennedy was shot. I mean, it was like, oh, we could be happy again. It was kind of became my persona. Everybody knew I liked the Beatles. In fact, when I was not inducted into the National Honor Society, I had the grades, but you're supposed to be a leader. And they said I had no leadership. All she wants to do is listen to the Beatles. Well, that was true enough, but I would do my homework and then listen to the Beatles. A teacher said, yes, it was the teachers who blackballed you from National Honor Society. It wasn't your leadership ability that you lacked, it was your disruptive ability they worried about. And everybody heaved a sigh of relief when I left school without having started a riot. I didn't even know that. I was very much against the Vietnam War. I was a big fan of Martin Luther King, and I mentioned people being upset about Kennedy. There were 2 or 3 other at my school in Palatka, Florida, were upset when he was shot. My phys ed teacher let me sit in her office during that period while everybody else celebrated. No, I love swimming, like to go to the beach, but someone was shocked to find out I'm not a outdoorsy person. They thought I was Mark Trail and drag. Because I want to wilderness. I just want to know it's there. I don't want to actually get out in it. I hate camp. I want to go look at my parks, but I don't want to sleep in it. Time conflict. There was a lot of time conflict. When I came from trials to do appeal, it was, I could take transcripts with me to county council meetings. I would still write it down as vacation time, but I got so much work sitting through those long, boring, going back to the outdoorsy. Everybody agreed I was not a sissy. I'm not a wimp. I sat through hundreds and hundreds of hours of county council meetings. I've got resilience. Well, it was Halifax Plantation, what's now Bulow Creek State Park, and Dr. Boardman. And then I felt like there were a lot of dues to be paid, because my very first foray in environmentalism was spectacularly successful. Halifax Plantation that was about to be built, closing the gap between Ormond and Flagler. The developers were going to close the gap between one urbanized area and the other and wipe out an entire ecosystem. Went to the next zoning meeting, and that was 1978, so Star Wars was still popular. Walter Boardman was our Obi-Wan Kenobi, and helping us fight the evil empire that was going to destroy a wonderful planet with their evil deaths. And Dr. Boardman actually said something similar to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Often say, you don't have a chance. You can't win but the stakes are too high to let it go by default. Obi-Wan had said you can't win, but there are alternatives to fighting. Very, very lucky that Walter Boardman decided to retire here because he could give you at least something to do, and it was just therapeutic at the time. You know, we just have to do some. Want, 20, 30 years from then to be asked, well, what did you do to stop this? Well, there was nothing I could do, but he gave little jobs, and they all piled up, and it wound up being bought for a state. He was a heaven-sent person. He was the superintendent of schools in Oceanside, New York. That was the first job he retired from. He retired to D.C. and became the first paid director of Nature Conservancy. He did a lot of things in D.C. He became very good friends with William O. Douglas, Supreme Court Justice. In fact, the first time Dr. Boardman came to my office at the Halifax Law Center, I had a framed picture of William O. Douglas because he had written a dissent in a case saying that trees themselves should have standing to sue. Back in the 70s, late 60s, was trying to sue on behalf of the trees. Anyway, that he was our hero. And I had this framed portrait of him, and Dr. Boardman came in with his flyers he was going to give me, and he said, "Oh, that's a great picture of Bill. Where did you get it?" Bill. And it turned out Walter and Betty were great friends with Bill and his wife. He hiked with Justice Douglas. The length of the area that they were going to turn into a motorway, people could look at the Appalachian Trail from their cars. He said, that's not really a great idea, the whole idea of the trail. So Douglas invited all the editors of the major newspapers to take a hike to show them what would be wiped out by this hike. Dr. Boardman's the only person that made the hike the whole way with him.
Oh, no.
But Dr. Boardman had been, he worked with Pete Seeger trying to save the Hudson River from Con's latest power plant. They had come up with a 6-step program how to fight these sorts of things. And number one was get a 6 or 7 member executive committee, just something manageable, and then come up with projects, and everybody worked like the devil on each one of their projects. And he kept saying it might not work, but you got to do something. The stakes are too high. He lived in a trailer. He had a mobile home, and he was, I guess, money-wise, was pretty wealthy. He was extremely wealthy, spiritually, community-wise. He just lived very simply. Land acquisition, because that Halifax Plantation is kind of what brought land acquisition out of the closet in this area. Actually had a meeting in the back room of a Chinese restaurant and whispered with Dr. Boardman about buying the land. There would be a willing seller, and they'd get the fair market value. Everybody thought that was a communist thing about buying land and making it just public. But that was what the Nature Conservancy did, and we taught it in this area. And in '86, Volusia County passed the first Volusia Forever referendum. '88, Flagler did it. Flagler's passed it 3 times, and I've been on their land acquisition committee since '89. And we like to go on the tour de Brynn to show people, well, that park, I was part of acquiring that. All the rest were easy. Halifax Plantation was a war, but once that caught on, it was great. It was fun. They had the whole state mechanisms to go and acquire land. Anyway, that's what I'm proudest of. Well, the astounding thing is that people voted to tax themselves, pay extra tax to buy land for environmental preservation. And because it's a pure tax, that's what it's going to be for, is to buy land for preservation, water recharge, recreational opportunities. And it goes through a tremendous vetting process. So you've got to have appraisal, be fair market value, and it has to be a willing seller. Well, if you're the owner, you just need to get a form, or somebody will fill it out for you. But if you're willing to identify a piece of property, you need to find out who the owners are, willing to at least talk about it. All sorts of ways to conserve it. They could sell just an easement, keep operating it as a farm, or keep living there and get money or tax breaks for letting it be conserved. Well, every civic group we contacted passed resolutions against it. This is something Dr. Boardman said to do, get official positions from like the Garden Club, Ecological Society, Sierra Club, just everybody. Be able, get their permission to tell the decision makers this, and these people don't want this to happen either, you know, and also the big part of the credit goes to the Daytona Beach News. They were reporting the story, but that was an editorial decision in itself to let Mary McLaughlin report what was going on. Now the state park along Bulow Creek, they just, oh my God, you know, this is terrible. The community was very much against. The exact same thing happened, and I got to witness it when we showed Hyatt Brown a map of the area, and he goes, "Oh, this is Tomoka State. No, this little dot here is Tomoka State Park. This is Belle Meade. This is where they're going to build the city." And he got the same look of horror that everybody else did, and he said, "Well, they can't develop that. That'll ruin the whole area." Right, that's exactly right. His reaction was to use the favors he was due as the outgoing Speaker of the House of the Florida House of Representatives. He said this, you know, "Well, I've got a lot of favors to call in. Maybe this could be it." And can you imagine a politician today using, this is what I want to use my clout for, is to create a park. And when he was the keynote speaker at the dedication, Hyatt Brown,
Okay.
2 years later at the dedication, he said, I've dedicated lots of things, you know, buildings, bridges, roads, and we cut the ribbon and say, this will be here for 50 years. But this dedication, he said, he was such a diplomat, and I often said he could turn a politician into a statesman, because he could always bring what's really important to the discussion, and recognizing that all this person might care about is the money to be made. He could turn it around, get them to see how this would make them look good, you know, and it won't hurt that much. I mean, well, the state park is just half of what was going to be Halifax Plantation. They have their development on the other side of the highway. That would, you know, he probably told them, "You'll be the great development that has a, you know, state park right across the road from it." There was one project that I won't identify, but the community was up in arms about something, and it was just their backyards, you know, basically. But they were very rich, and and the whole community thought this was an environmental thing. And Dr. Boardman did not get involved in it. He said, "This is good though, because if you can harness that selfishness and tell them, remember when you fought this project, if you can harness it for a real environmental issue, all to the good." My dad was, at the time this was going on in 78, 79, he was a prosecutor in Palatka while I was a defense lawyer down here. One of the lawyers from Volusia said, asked George if he knew my dad. Do you know what she's involved in? You know, she needs to be careful. She's, you know, these are some tough people. It wasn't ITT or anything, but they were, you know, a lot of clout. Another lawyer asked him, "George, did you raise your daughter to be an environmentalist?" He said, "Is that what she's doing? Then yes." I think he was great with that. I got to introduce him and Dr. Boardman. They're both Leos. Reed Hughes in July, I think, of 79, set up a meeting with Dr. Boardman and Hyatt Brown at Hyatt Brown's house. And Dr. Boardman invited me. I got to be a fly on the wall. Dr. Boardman brought Richard Ludington, who was then the executive director of Nature Conservancy. And Reed came to the door, and he had a textbook in his hand, and he said, "I can't stay, I've got a Spanish class tonight." He had arranged for everybody to get together. I just thought that was the way he did everything, you know, just put people together. But at that meeting, after Hyatt Brown realized this will ruin the whole area, he just turned to Dick Ludington and said, are they really interested in selling? And he said, "I think they are." That was a Thursday night, and the following Tuesday, the newspaper said the new director of state lands and land acquisition was Richard Ludington. Somebody got him named the director of state lands just when we needed to shepherd this purchase through. I guess that was, you know, Hyatt Brown said he had some favors to call in. He was an oil man from Texas, and I'm not sure how he wound up here, but his office was on the other side of the railroad tracks in Holly Hill, Hughes Oil Company, and that's where we had our meetings most of the time. Every time he got a new office, open it up to all the environmental groups to have their meetings. All the rooms were a mess. He had these priceless works of art framed, leaning against the walls. The tables were covered with just cluttered with awards, and my favorites were the thank you notes from students, picture of their graduation. Thank you for my education. He just handed out scholarships left and right. He did what you'd like to think you would do if you had millions of dollars. You know, just spent it on people and nature. He put his own money into part of the Spruce Creek acquisition very quietly, and he was the treasurer for Walter Boardman was his treasurer when he ran for Congress in '82, and that was where I really first heard of him. Knew more about him. Dr. Boardman said he's the real deal, true believer, I guess. He was very religious, devoted to protecting creation, worship the Creator by protecting creation. Decided in the late 60s I wanted to live in Daytona, mainly because Tibbin Davidson was bringing the London Symphony Orchestra here every summer. It seemed like a wonderful place to live. We went to Howard Johnson's on US 1, and there was a black family eating there. It was the first time I'd ever seen that in a restaurant, and I thought, well, this is so cosmopolitan. And you get an impression of a place from a funny perspective. And then I did move here in 1974, and it just wasn't what I hoped for. And the main thing was, one day I picked up the paper and saw that the population had nearly tripled since I made my decision to move here. That plays into all this, like driving on the beach. That we had hearings. I was on the Charter Review Commission in 1986. There was a beach committee, and every hearing they'd ask people, don't repeat the same thing, but it didn't matter. They had to get up and tell you on the beach, and my daddy would build a bonfire, and we'd drive our car, and we'd drive all the way from Crescent. That's right, back when there were about 1/5 as many people. You know, it was bad enough then, but you can't do it now. I wanted to preserve what they remembered back when things were totally different. It was pretty different for me. I still liked it being here, and they brought the London Symphony back after I'd been here a while. Let your yards grow back. Do you know lawns are legal in Florida? They're legal. They let people and put water, perfectly good drink. Now they have reuse water in some communities, but in the 90s, it was estimated that 50% of the non-agricultural water we were pulling out of the aquifer was going on lawns. And lawns were invented to show your neighbors and the fellow lords and ladies just how much money and resources you had to waste. You know, I can have this monoculture swath of grass. If you let that go and let some native plants grow, you can get something for the critters, you know, butterfly, the smaller critters. We've driven all the big ones away. And the main thing is don't waste the water on it. You know, we've got a full source aquifer in Volusia, which the Environmental Council had designated that way, and we're mining it. We're not letting it, it's not recharging anymore. Paved over where the recharge areas are, and that's we mine the fresh water, the salt and mineral waters coming up from below. And nobody's worried about or even thinking about the fact that's going to happen. A map of the world, we're one of the very few lands in our latitude that's not a desert, but we're working on it. We're trying to get rid of it because that's our only source of water.
Yeah.